welcome to episode 13 of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we've got a lot in store to discuss for you. I'm actually just got back from Phoenix last night, where Alabama was in the Final Four for their first time ever. So we're going to talk about that, how that experience went. Then we will talk about the game that happened on Saturday. And then we've got some really important news to discuss as it relates to our head basketball coach, because there has been quite a bit of shakeup in the SEC over the past 48 hours. So let's get right into the show. So first things first, I want to talk about the Final Four. I did go to the Final Four. So for most people that know me, I did go, and I mentioned that I went to LA. My reason for going to LA was I had said while I had the means and while I had the capability, I wanted to be at the first time that Alabama made a Final Four. I want to be at that Elite Eight game so that I would always be able to say I was at the first time we won an Elite Eight game to make the Final Four. And when we cut down the nets, that was a really special experience that I wanted to have. So I did go to LA. I was able to experience that. It was absolutely incredible. So the decision was super easy. I have to be at the Final Four, right? As long as I have the means, again, if I can find a place to stay, if I can find a flight, I want to be in Phoenix for the Final Four. So I immediately began looking at flights, began looking at options, and came to find that the Final Four is incredibly, A, expensive, and B, difficult to get to, because so many people have booked trips, whether it be media or college basketball fans, have booked trips to the Final Four in preparation for this event. So getting flights into Phoenix was one of the most difficult things. So I decided, well, if I'm going to have to rent a car or get an Uber anyways, what if I just fly into Tucson? So that's actually what I did. I flew into Tucson on Friday night after work, drove up from Tucson on Friday, spent all day Saturday at the game, kind of in surrounding areas of the game. The tip-off tailgate that they had there outside the stadium, hung out with Danny, Stu, that I know some people here know, and just had a really fun time at the game. Then went into the game, saw the Purdue versus NC State game, sat in the Alabama section, which was kind of the Purdue section in certain parts because Purdue had the majority of the stadium and seemed to have bought up quite a lot of Alabama fans' tickets. But they were in all sections of the stadium, so it wasn't just Alabama fans that had sold those tickets. And then had that Alabama UConn game. It doesn't end exactly how we had hoped, but nevertheless, I was in Phoenix for the Final Four. And then on Sunday, I went to for the Fan Fest, and the Fan Fest was inside the Phoenix Civic Center or Convention Center, and it was absolutely incredible. They had all their corporate partners, had booths set up. There was basketball shooting in different spots. There was a football area. There was a baseball area. They ended up having a 3-on-3 tournament that DeMarcus Cousins was in, and Cam Newton, and Swaggy P, and Paul Pierce, and there was just all sorts of things with tons and tons of fans, all there for college basketball. If you've ever been to like an SEC baseball tournament that happens in Hoover or any of these big championship events, it was like that, but on a much grander scale. And it was a very, very fun event. I thought that the NCAA did a really, really good job, and the city of Phoenix did a really good job embracing the Final Four. Everywhere you went around Phoenix, you saw things about the Final Four. I was actually taking Nate Oats' burner back to the airport, and I saw a sign on the freeway, which I will actually post here. But the sign was talking about, your one shining moment. The sign was trying to get people to, I believe it was to buckle their seatbelts. Again, I'll flash it up here on the screen. But they were looking for their one shining moment, right? So everything about the city was embracing the Final Four. I thought that the city of Phoenix did a really, really good job. For the number of people that were at the stadium, I thought the getting into and out of the stadium was as good as you could have asked for. It took a little bit to get in, but once I left the stadium, we actually made it on the main roads fairly quickly. It was not actually all that bad. in the Phoenix area. I thought that the city really embraced what the Final Four had to offer and was an awesome, awesome host. And I'm really, really glad that I went because, again, I think a Final Four is something that should be on everyone that considers himself a sports fan. It should be on your bucket list, and it should absolutely be something that you want to go to. And if your team is in it, even better. I got some pictures that I'm really going to cherish where Alabama is in that bracket of the Final Four teams, and the exposure that this got for the university and for the Alabama basketball team is absolutely incredible, and is probably in large part what we're going to talk about a little later in Nate Oats, being at Alabama and having his commitment to the university. So I want to talk a little bit about the UConn game, about how we ended up losing that game and what ended up happening, and but don't want to harp too much on it because at the end of the day, this team far exceeded expectations from what I think a lot of fans had. I think that many fans thought Sweet 16 was their ceiling, especially due to the fact that they had not found the defense for large portions of the season. And, I think that a lot of fans would have been happy if this team got to a Sweet 16, lost to North Carolina, and you would have been happy with the result. But they made a Final Four and did something that many thought just wasn't possible. I did a write-up on Substack talking about what the Final Four kind of meant to me, and the reason I ended up going to, again, I talked about the reason I went to LA was for that, to see if we could be there. And Alabama made it, right? Alabama made the Final Four, and you want to win the games, you want to win a national championship, and that's where you want to set your sights now. That's where Nate Oats, that's where the rest of the team has set their sights now. But making a Final Four is a massive, massive accomplishment, and does not need to be taken lightly. That banner is going to hang in Coleman forever. That trophy, for winning the West region is going to be there forever, right? So that is something to cherish and to embrace no matter what. So the UConn game, Alabama ends up losing that game. I have the stats here in front of me. They end up losing that game by 14. It's 86-72. Alabama honestly did a really good job in the game. Alabama was shooting really well in the first half. They were at 70% from three. But if you had watched much of Alabama or much of UConn this season, it kind of felt like the inevitable. It kind of felt like, even though Alabama was playing some of its best basketball, they had only had 5 turnovers in the first half. They were 70% from three in the first half. And were playing pretty well. It still kind of just felt like UConn was going to find a way to win the game. Because Alabama was going to probably shoot a little worse from three because 70% on a full game is not super realistic. They might have a couple of turnovers, but even if they didn't, UConn was just playing super sound basketball. And every time there was a tiny mistake from Alabama, whether it be, we took too long to take a three, an extra dribble, or there was a turnover or a steal, or we got our shot blocked, or a missed rotation. No matter what it was, any small mistake that some teams are unable to capitalize on, UConn absolutely capitalized every time, right? When you're talking about defending and the defense, part of the reason why UConn was so good in this game was UConn just capitalized and made Alabama defend for 30 seconds every possession, right? Ryland talked after the game, they asked, why is it so hard to defend UConn? And he's like, they have counters to your counters, and their sets do this. And, most teams we play may have a set for 2 or 3 guys. They had a set for every guy on the court, right? At the end of the day, Dan Hurley's offense is very methodical and, did a really good job of making our defense stressed out, and it stressed the defense. And the shots that Alabama was making were keeping us in the game, but it just wasn't enough. It was kind of too little too late almost. But that's okay, right? UConn goes on to beat Purdue to back-to-back win the national title the last 2 years, and the 14-point loss to Alabama that actually was much more like a 6 to 8 point game with 2.5 minutes to go. But, rises to 14 when Alabama tries to get some steals at the end of the game, was actually the closest game that UConn had in this entire tournament, right? Alabama did a very good job against UConn in comparison to what the rest of the field did, right? So losing to the team that's the eventual national champion is nothing to shake your head about, right? Dan Hurley coached an incredible bunch, and that bunch is going to go up there with some of the best to ever do it in terms of national championship teams. They go 36-3 on the season, right? They had just 3 losses and finish on an awesome winning streak. UConn, I mentioned Alabama ended up, only having 5 turnovers in the first half, shooting 70% from 3. They end the game shooting 47.8% from 3, right? Above our season average and absolutely good enough to win the game. But they only got off 11 threes. Alabama made 7 in the first half and only got off 11 total. Only made 11 total in the rest of the game. They were 7 for 10 in the first half, so they got off just 13 more. In the second half, going 11 for 23. 23 attempts isn't quite what Nate Oats wants. That was largely in part due to the fact that UConn was there on the catch, and UConn made sure in the second half to run Alabama off the line. The misses in the second half were not ideal, but again, we were going to miss some shots. If you tell me we're shooting 47.8% from 3 against UConn, I'm going to take it all day, every day. That is a really good shooting percentage, and whether they all happened right away or not, that percentage is fine. I have no problem with that. Alabama ended up with just 8 turnovers. If you've watched Alabama for pretty often, 8 turnovers is pretty low, right? A lot of that might have to do with the fact that this was a slower tempo game. There was only 63 possessions in this game. Again, a lot of that had to do with UConn's methodical offense. But 8 turnovers for Alabama basketball is very few, right? This team typically averages somewhere in the 10 to 12 range. Under 10 turnovers, again, I would have absolutely taken if you offered that to me coming into this game. Alabama has 15 fouls versus UConn has 17. Cool, right? All of these stats, if you offer them up to me, I'm absolutely going to take them, right? Alabama played a good game against UConn. UConn scored a 1.37 points per possession. Absolutely phenomenal, right? UConn's offensive sets and UConn's game plan worked to absolute perfection. In the first half, Alabama was making Stephon Castle shoot the 3, similar to how they did against Trimble and Kudo from North Carolina. Castle made a couple of threes. He ends up going 2 for 6 from 3, so the threes he made in the first half, were what they were. UConn shot 40% from 3 themselves, right? UConn got 8 blocks, right? That was a part that we thought might happen, and it did. Donovan Clingan had 4 blocks to his credit. But, at the end of the day, Alabama had 5 blocks. This was a fairly clean game from both sides. There were some fouls that were a little confusing to me, right? Mark Sears gets called for a foul on a hand check for fighting through a screen, but then the very next the possession just before, Mark Sears was being held in the same way, didn't get called for it, right? I thought that the ability for an Oats technical was very high in this game. Part of that to do with Pat Adams being on the ref sheet, but part of that just doing the way that this game was called. I thought that there was a decent chance that Nate was going to get a technical. He did not. I think he just knew that the points were way too important, and getting a technical at this point in the game and this point in the season was not something you could have. I thought that Grant Nelson played an awesome game. Grant Nelson goes 19 points, 15 rebounds, and had an absolute awesome tomahawk on Clingan, right? There were moments of this game where Alabama looked completely the part, right? UConn gets out to an 8-point lead in the second half. Alabama fights back to tie it. UConn immediately goes on an 8-0 run, right? It felt like every time Alabama gave the counterpunch, UConn was there to jump right back on it, right? There was no real runs in this game that UConn got on. Looking here at the breakdown, there was no run by either team that was over 8 points, right? So there were some runs. Don't get me wrong. Basketball is a game of runs. But Alabama kept away the kill shot. They kept away that under 10-point run, or over 10-point run, I should say. So If you give me these things going into the game, hey, there's not going to be a kill shot run. Alabama's going to have just 8 turnovers. They're going to shoot 47% from 3. They're going to have less fouls. They're going to get a 1.14 points per possession against a really good defense. Probably would have taken it, right? UConn's just that good. UConn took advantage of every mistake, every missed swap, every anything, and made us pay for it, and they won the game, right? Again, this was about I believe this was an 8-point game or a 7-point game when Mark Sears hit a 3 with about 2.5 minutes to go. They ended up hitting a couple of threes late in the game when Alabama was going for steals and trying to create turnovers to see if they could lengthen the game. They ended up losing by 14. 14 was not what this game was. This game, again, was somewhere around an 8-point, 10-point game. For the majority of the game, neither team had led by more than 8 prior to the very end of this game. So just a heads up, But nevertheless, Alabama played the eventual national champion to that point, and what they did was they proved that Nate Oates' offense is capable of making this type of run in the tournament, and our offense is not what lost us this game. I won't even say our defense lost us the game. I think UConn was just the better team, but if you're going to point at one of the two things as to why you lost, you're definitely going to point at the defense that gave up the 1.37. You're not going to point at the offense that scored that scored a 1.14 and had about 48% from 3. You're not going to point at that, right? You're definitely going to point at the defense if you were to point at one of the two things for this, right? So that's the big thing, right? Be proud of this team. Be proud of what they were able to accomplish, and know that this team will forever be known as the team that made Alabama's first ever Final Four. I do not think this will be Nate Oates' last Final Four. I think this is just the first. As Nick Saban says, this is just the beginning. I would fully expect this team to be back, whether it be this year or in the near future. I think this coming year's team has a great chance. But, that's just something that I think that you should keep in mind. I want to transition to the last topic. I'm talking about Nate Oates. I'm talking about his ability to get Alabama to the Final Four. So we started to hear rumors of Calipari to Arkansas while I was in Phoenix. On Sunday, we start hearing, Calipari to Phoenix. And then it basically is all but confirmed. Calipari to Arkansas. While I'm in Phoenix, I start hearing that. And then it's all but confirmed Calipari is going to Arkansas. Straight up, he's accepted the job. The Tyson family, for those that are unaware, Arkansas has serious pockets. They have Walmart. They have the Tyson Foods family. They have Dunn Trucking. They have Jerry Jones. They have some very large pocket individuals that influence a lot of the athletics that happen in Northwest Arkansas. Largely, Tyson. He is their biggest, I believe his name's John Tyson. He's their largest donor. He is friends with Calipari and was reported, he is putting together a package to bring Calipari to Arkansas. That package was going to include, roughly $8 million in salary and a $5 million NIL package that he could spend. Less than what Calipari was making at Kentucky, considerably more available for NIL, right? And that was what you started hearing, and then it's all but confirmed Cal is going to Arkansas. And so, as an Alabama fan, we have heard many times that Nate Oates likes it in Alabama and likes being at what he would consider a football school, or what many would consider a football school. The reason Nate Oates likes being at that football school is you can just coach. You can worry about basketball, you can worry about recruits, but you can just coach. You're not the biggest person on campus. You're not the person that the media is going to go absolutely crazy over in your state. You can still go to Walmart. Are people going to notice you? Sure. Are people going to know who you are? Sure. But you're not going to be walking your dog and have somebody accosting you outside of your house asking you if you have a comment about taking the Arkansas job. That happened to Calipari. At the end of the day, no matter what Calipari said, the Kentucky basketball coach is similar to the Alabama football coach. You are the biggest person in the state. It just is what it is. And being the basketball coach at Alabama is similar to being the football coach in Kentucky. Not saying nobody cares, because people do, but it's way different, right? But you still get the benefit of being at a program that's that huge, right? So Nate gets the benefit of being at a place like Alabama, but without the pressure of being the Alabama football coach, right? And he's often said that he likes that. It's been widely reported that many people he had spoken to were very, like, oh, that's a good thing. So, that's what we know about Nate. And our understanding is, we don't think Nate would take Kentucky. But clearly Kentucky wants Nate, right? Nate Oats runs a style of offense that Kentucky fans would love. Nate Oats is huge with recruits because of the style of offense he runs, and he allows athletes to be athletes, which is, what many people have thought Calipari should do for many years. He has won, right? Nate Oats has made now 3 Sweet 16s, a Final Four. Won the SEC championship, regular season and conference twice in 5 years, right? Nate Oats has accomplished great things. And so Kentucky clearly wants somebody that can win and can win at the biggest stage and win in March, right? Their issue with Cal wasn't what he did in the regular season. It was that he lost in March. He lost to St. Peter's. He lost to Oakland. Like, that's what they care about. And so was something that you just had to keep in mind. Nate Oats, Kentucky's going to call. And as much as we think Nate Oats is going to say no, Kentucky calling is not something that's easy to turn down. It's similar to Alabama calling, right? As Bear Bryant said, Mom called me home, right? Whoever it is, right? When Cal left Memphis for Kentucky, he said, yes, I said I wasn't going to leave, but it's Kentucky, right? Those are the type jobs, Alabama football, Kentucky basketball, these are the type jobs that people leave jobs for, jobs that they thought they may never leave. So in the back of every Alabama fan's mind, you knew, I just need Nate Oats to come out and say, hey, I'm not going to Kentucky, right? For everything we think, we're pretty sure he's not going, but I have to hear it out of Nate's mouth. I have to hear, I'm not going to be the Kentucky coach. So this all happens. So full disclosure, I was actually on a flight from from Houston just before this news broke. So I, am flying out of Tucson to Houston, Houston back to Birmingham. And then when I, get near landing in Birmingham, I see a tweet from Jim Dunaway, which many of you may know. He was a pretty legendary figure. He's on the next round now. He was long time on Jocks out of Birmingham. Definitely has a lot of connected sources at Alabama and Auburn, but he's a little bit more connected at Alabama. That Kentucky has been working back channels today to gauge the interest of Nate Oats per sources. The $18 million buyout appears not to be an obstacle. I'm told Nate does not want to leave, but Kentucky is still going to make that push. Now would be a really good time for Oats' announcement, right? That happened at 7:38 yesterday, right? So that's the news that we all were curious about, right? Officially, Kentucky's coming. Right? So until Oats officially says, hey, I'm not going, when somebody, when you think somebody's going to be an option, okay, it's one thing. When they actually start coming, it's a whole different ballgame, right? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Whatever saying you want to use, right? You can say one thing, but what happens when it actually happens? So we waited. And then at 8 o'clock on the dot, and I think that's important, and I'll talk about it why here in a second. We get a statement released from Nate Oats, Bama Nation. I'm fully committed to this team and to this university. We have already accomplished some great things here, and there's nothing I want more than for the University of Alabama to win its first national championship in men's basketball. Despite any rumors to the contrary, rest assured that I will continue that pursuit as your head coach. Roll Tide. That was followed up by a statement from Greg Byrne saying, we're committed to supporting Nate Oats as he continues to lead Alabama men's basketball in its pursuit of a national championship and encourage our fans to be a part of that by supporting Yay Alabama. I know I've said this before, but want to reiterate how important this is with the changing landscape in college athletics. Nate and I talk regularly about the priorities of the program, and NIL is at the forefront, as is the day-to-day development space of our teams, for which we are taking steps to address as we speak. We appreciate your support through Yale, Alabama, and look forward to celebrating many more championships in the years to come. Roll Tide. Right? So I'm going to post these both up on the screen just so everybody can see them. So these two tweets come out at 8 o'clock on the dot. Nate Oats comes out. Then Greg Burns comes out as a quote tweet of Nate Oats's with the Alabama linked. Personally, I do not think that it was a coincidence that Jim Dunaway tweeted what he tweeted 20 minutes prior to these coming out. Christian and the guys over at Crimson Crossover talked about it as well. I think that there is a very good chance that Jim Dunaway was told this as kind of a precursor to Nate Oats sending out his statements. Because those statements can be whipped up fairly quick, but, those were formatted. They were done in a way that, they were obviously written up by the PR team. They were released in tandem. This was not something that just randomly, oh snap, there's getting to be some buzz. A pretty important guy in the state tweeted something. Let's throw out a tweet. I don't think that's what happened. I think what happened was, Jim Dunaway was given a nudge. Hey, Kentucky's coming after Nate. And, hey, can I put that out there? Oh, yeah, put it out. And then Alabama releases a statement to fully show, hey, yep, I'm staying. Done. Right? Awesome as an Alabama fan to see. I encourage y'all, if you have not seen the Crimson Crossover podcast, they were actually recording when all this news broke. And Charles, his face was exactly what my face was when I read it on Twitter sitting on the plane. It was, whew. It actually happened, right? Nate Oats is staying. Like, what a world. The Alabama basketball coach turned down Kentucky. Alabama basketball. Like, Alabama basketball. The team that just made its first ever Final Four just turned down Kentucky. That's huge. Because, for anybody that's followed this team or knows my opinion or knows anything about Nate Oats, I think that he has the ability to go to many Final Fours, right? He's that good of a coach. Aaron Estrada went as far as to say he thinks Oats will win a title in the next 2 to 3 years. But nevertheless, Nate Oats is an incredible coach. And to know that he's going to be the guy leading Alabama basketball for the years to come is absolutely huge. Right? So I'm going to take this time to say, as Greg Byrne mentioned, support Yale, Alabama. Support the NIL collective. From what I have heard, Alabama increased Nate Oats' NIL pool either double or triple depending upon what you think the NIL pool was last year. But the number is good. Could it be better? Sure. But it's good. It is at a place that we can absolutely compete in the SEC. Absolutely. And so that is awesome. The other thing, and it was mentioned in Greg Byrne's statement, but they are working on the practice facilities. There's going to be a renovation to the practice facilities, to the locker rooms, to the things that the players interact with. Nate has often talked about the arena. Everybody wants to talk about the arena. But the arena is for the fans. The team really only plays in the arena on game days. All right? The practice facilities are for the players. The locker room is for the players. The offices are for the players. Those are much different, right? It's much different when you're talking fan experience versus player experience, right? I'm not going to say fan experience does not matter, because it absolutely does. But player experience is what gets you the players and gets you to go on runs like in this Final Four. And Final Four runs get boosters involved, which will help you build said arena, right? This Final Four run, I think, will help speed up the timeline for what the arena would be. If you thought the arena would be 5 years, I think it's 2 to 3. If you thought the arena would be 2 to 3, I think it's 1 to 2, right? Whatever the timeline was, I think the Final Four run, in combination with Oats affirming his commitment to Alabama and telling all the boosters, I am not leaving for Kentucky. Again, huge job, right? Because by saying you're not leaving for Kentucky, what you're kind of saying is there may not be a job I'm ever going to leave for. Because Kentucky is that job, right? Kentucky is that job. So if you're not going to leave for Kentucky, there's a chance you're not leaving for any job, ever. That's something that boosters want to hear. And it's proof, right? You know that Kentucky reached out to Nate. So him turning them down publicly is huge. So that helps get the boosters involved, which helps build an arena, which does everything that we're talking about, right? So that's absolutely massive. It's not something I thought I would be in a position to say that Alabama basketball coach turned down Kentucky, but here we are. And I'm proud of it. You know, it's one of the coolest things I've been able to, experience was this Final Four run. This team is one I will never forget. I'm going to write out a few articles in the coming days and release those on Substack. So if you are not subscribed, please subscribe to the Substack. I'm going to be putting out those articles, breaking down this team, talking about what it means to me as a fan, talking about, what this run was. And then as, to kind of go into what the future looks like, I'll also probably be breaking down new players as we get them committed out of the portal. I know Houston Mallett committed from Pepperdine. I'm not going to probably do a player-by-player breakdown as they commit, but I probably will choose a month once I know who all is on the roster and who the new guys are, and, do a write-up of, either all the transfers or all the new guys. But I will break down all the new players, what you need to know, what you need to see for all the new players, whether they be freshmen or transfers. So keep in mind with that. I will talk about some of them on the podcast, but do not expect an emergency podcast anytime someone commits, right? That's not going to happen. But I do commit to try to putting, 2 to 3 of these out a month at least. The other thing I will mention is I am going to be moving a little bit into more football coverage. Personally, I'm a little bit more involved in basketball than I am in football. So I am going to put out more content as it relates to Alabama basketball. However, Alabama football is something that I'm obviously interested in. I grew up in the state of Alabama. I went to the university. It's absolutely something I care about. So I will be, moving into football coverage a little bit as we have A-Day coming up this Saturday. So I will do next week's podcast is going to be talking about A-Day, what I like to see, what I don't like to see, what I think is going on as it relates to, what lineups might look like. So A-Day, we'll be breaking that next week on the podcast. So for anybody interested in football coverage, stay tuned for that. And then I will do some write-ups for football as well. But just want to give everybody a heads up. Football and basketball, I think, is where I'm going to spend most of my time as it relates to the podcast and to the write-ups. I am, willing to do write-ups on other sports as they pique my interest or things happen. But football and basketball are definitely where I, am the biggest of fans and where I follow the closest and have the most insight and, have a couple of sources, not going to call them elite sources by any stretch, but I do have some people that I know. So those are the places where I feel like I can contribute the most. So if you are interested in the content that I'm putting out, whether it be this podcast, YouTube, Substack, anything, please subscribe to here. Follow me along on Twitter. That's really where most of my stuff goes out at. That's where you can contact me. So if you are interested in anything or would like me to do any write-ups, please reach out and let me know. As always, thank everyone for watching and listening, commenting, subscribing, whatever you do to the show. I really appreciate it. It really helps me out. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.